Hi everyone, welcome to, I think it's week 8. I think there's 2 weeks to go after this. Biology and physics, maybe. Anyway, I've got it written down. So today we're going to talk about genes to proteins and everything that happens in that space. So what does it mean? What are the implications and all the bits in between? So at the very beginning, at the very basis, we have this flow chart. So DNA, which is the genetic code. So think all the way back to when you're being built, put together. So DNA, genetic code, which builds our proteins, which are the bricks and mortar. And then we have the cells, when this determines what you look like. Your hair color, eye color, so on and so forth. I need to get a tissue, 1 second. So inside the cell, we have the nucleus. Looks like a donut, I know. And inside here we have all of the DNA. So the DNA tells the cell what to do. Tells the cell what to do. So if this was a pancreas cell, the DNA would produce a hormone and tell the cell to do something. And inside the DNA, we have this code. You'll hear it referred to as the genetic code. We have 4 letters in our code. G, A, T, and C. We have, these are called bases. And these come in base pairs where G binds to C. So this is called a base pair. So these are bound together in base pair. Each of these 3 these are called triplets. And these are the code. These little triplets here make up the code. Each of these triplets makes a different part of a protein. So you stack lots of these triplets onto each other, and you're building protein. Proteins are the workhorses of the cells and the body. Proteins, a protein in your hair called keratin, protein in your skin called keratin. There's enzymes, like the things that break up food in the digestive tract, they are proteins as well. But they're encoded for in DNA in this triplet. So if we look at and this code is very specific. We have genetic diseases. So I want you to, I'm going to give 2 minutes to think about what a genetic disease is, and if you can, a couple of examples. So 2 minutes to think about that. So, what is a genetic disease? It is a disease caused by a change in the genetic code. So that code of the triplets is what causes the genetic disease. Change in the genetic code. So an example would be, so if it was originally remember, this is really, really specific, and if we change one of these things, even just one of them, there could be thousands of these in each gene, and there are thousands of them in some genes, millions in fact. But if we change one of these to what do you think will happen to the protein that is made by this gene? And remember, the protein is what tells the cell what to do. So if we change the code that is supposed to make the protein, so let's have a think about what will happen if I change even one of these, or even if I switch the position around. Will the protein at the end do what it's supposed to do? So we've had to think, if we change one of these, even just one, the protein that is created from this will probably not work. So this is really important when we're looking at some of the more important proteins in the body. So if you've got your phone or computer there, have a search for what hemoglobin is. I'll give you a couple of minutes to do that. So the protein, what is hemoglobin? So hemoglobin is how your blood is red. It's what makes your blood red, but it's also what carries the oxygen around the body. So in the red blood cells, they are a donut shape, and they have 4 little bits in here where the oxygen that's carried around our system is bound to those. If we change any of the protein in there, we change what it looks like. So if it's supposed to be this nice straight line, and we make it like this, then it won't do. It will not work. It won't carry the oxygen around. Unfortunately, when this happens, we get what's called sickle cell anemia. So instead of making this nice donut shape, we change the shape of this one protein here, and the cells end up looking like this. And unfortunately, a person with sickle cell anemia doesn't have a very nice life because they can't carry much oxygen around. And if we go all the way back to that genetic code, and we pretend this is the genetic code for hemoglobin, and we swap this one, that makes it from a nice functioning red blood cell, the thing that makes your red blood, the thing that allows us to take oxygen around the body, to this. By changing one letter in the code, just one. Now, the next thing you're going to ask me is why does this happen? Why do things get changed around? And I'll explain why. We look at it like, I'm going to turn the fan on. It happens random. So there's this thing called the genetic lottery, which says that sometimes you get a random, and we call these mutations. So mutation. The DNA mutates and changes. So I want to have a think, I'll give you a minute or two to think if you know of anything that might cause these mutations. I'll give you one: smoking. So anything they tell you that can cause cancer is what causes these mutations. So if you ever think about things you think might cause these mutations. So mutations can be caused by smoking, drinking alcohol in excess. It's also caused by too much exposure to the sun, so not slapping, as they call it. Environmental exposure to toxins, so environmental exposure to toxins. Environmental exposure to toxins. Environmental exposure to toxins. What else? Unfortunately, there's certain industries, so exposure to radiation. So you've ever had an X-ray and you walk in and they give you a big lead to wear over certain parts of your body? That's so you don't have exposure to radiation. Now, a woman has all the eggs, they carry all the eggs that they have at the same time. So the DNA that created you, one half of it comes from the egg cell from your mum. Unfortunately, as time goes on, as a woman gets older, they're constantly exposed to the sun, they're constantly exposed to things that will damage the DNA. So the mutation damages the DNA. So we're talking about damaging the DNA. So as a woman gets older, the eggs that are inside the inside, I can't remember where they sit now. Anyway, the eggs that the woman has is constantly being exposed to dangerous things. So the DNA that's in here, over time, the longer a woman is alive, the higher the risk of things like Down syndrome in mothers over 40 is really high because the DNA becomes damaged. I don't think I offended any of the women around. When I say that, it's really always worried that I'm going to offend someone. And what happens is when these mutations happen in the egg of the mother, Sometimes in the sperm cell from the father, but usually just in the egg cell of the mother, you end up with these mutations. So these mutations are then passed down to the new baby. So the new baby is growing without some of these proteins. So I want you to have a think about, I have a search for the word chromosome. We'll talk about Down syndrome and what it is. And how not just the DNA code, but how the DNA is stored can affect. So I'll give you a minute to have a look at that. So all of the DNA, this GATC code, isn't just floating around. It's not just floating about willy-nilly in space. It's stored in these things, something like this, obviously my artistic skill, and they're called chromosomes. So chromosomes is where all the DNA is stored. In the cells, in these weird looking things. And we have to have a pair of chromosomes. So one pair from mum, one pair from dad. And if we don't have a pair of them, the chromosome doesn't work. So Down syndrome is a different kind of genetic disease than sickle cell anemia. It's caused by 3 chromosome 21. So what happens is people that suffer from Down syndrome, they don't have all of the genes on a whole chromosome. So a lot of developmental genes that help us develop just don't occur. They don't exist. The genes, the body doesn't know they're there. Because it needs 2 of each, but it unfortunately has 3 of each in those that suffer from Down syndrome, then you end up with, it's more like it's not there at all. It doesn't get passed on to the rest of the baby from the very first cell. So this one's going to be pretty short and sweet. The next one will be big. It's the particle and wave model. And I'm going to set some questions, or just an activity. So how could you adjust your lifestyle to minimize the risk of these mutations. So, what can we do to avoid that? And we'll talk about that at the beginning of next week. I thought I'd keep this one nice and short and on the whiteboard, and next week will be a big one with the particle and wave model of the atom for physics. So I'll talk about this the first part of next week, and I'll see you guys then.